My mother took my inheritance because she wants me to be successful, until the truth exploded at dinner. When my grandmother died, she left me $80,000. My mother immediately took control of it. "You're not ready for this kind of money," she said. "I'm going to manage it until you prove you can be successful on your own." I was 24 with a college degree and a job, but according to her, I wasn't successful enough yet. She kept moving the goalpost. First, I needed to make $40,000 a year. When I got there, suddenly I needed 50. When I hit 50, she said I needed to be a manager first, then a senior manager, then I needed to own property. But how could I buy property without my inheritance? "That's the point," she'd say. "Really successful people don't need handouts. They make their own way." Meanwhile, she was living extremely well. New car, kitchen renovation, yearly cruises. When I asked about it, she'd say she was investing my money wisely. "You'll thank me when you see how much it's grown." She never showed me any investment statements. She'd just pat my hand and say, "Trust me, I'm doing this because I love you." Most parents would have just spent it, but I want you to earn your success properly. She had this whole philosophy about it. She'd tell everyone at family gatherings how she was teaching me the value of hard work by not giving me my grandmother's money. Too many young people get ruined by windfalls. I'm protecting them from that. Relatives would actually praise her for being so thoughtful. My aunt would say things like, "You're such a good mother," making sure they learn responsibility. My mother would smile and say, "It's hard but necessary. They'll understand when they're older." Years passed like this. I got promoted 3 times, started making $70,000, saved enough to buy a small condo with a mortgage. Every milestone I hit, she'd create a new requirement. "You need to be married first. Then, you need to have 6 months of emergency savings. Then, you need to max out your retirement for at least 5 years. I was 32 when everything unraveled. My cousin Kendall was getting married and asked my mother to help with planning since she'd organized so many family events with her investment returns from managing my money so well. Kendall thought she was complimenting her. My mother smiled and said she'd love to help. The wedding planning got expensive fast. Kendall kept choosing pricier options and my mother kept encouraging her. "You only get married once," she'd say. "Don't settle for less than perfect." Kendall was stressed about the cost, but my mother waved her off. "I can help with some of it. I've been very fortunate with my investments." She ended up contributing $30,000 to Kendall's wedding. She wrote the check right in front of everyone at the family dinner, making this big show of her generosity. Kendall was crying with gratitude. Everyone was saying how wonderful my mother was. That's when my Uncle Robert, who's an accountant, made an innocent comment. "That's so generous, especially since you're managing that inheritance for Jamie. Must be hard to keep those funds separate." My mother went completely still. "What inheritance?" Kendall asked. Robert looked confused. "The money from Grandma. Your aunt's been managing it until Jamie proves they're successful enough." He turned to me. "By the way, you should probably get those funds transferred soon. There's tax implications if a parent holds money for an adult child too long." The whole table went quiet. Kendall looked at my mother. "You gave me Jamie's inheritance money?" My mother started talking fast. No, that's my investment returns. I've been very careful to keep everything separate." But Robert wasn't done. "Actually, if you've been managing it this long, you should have detailed records. Investment statements, transaction histories, tax documents. Jamie, you've been declaring the interest income on your taxes, right?" I said I hadn't seen any documents. Robert's expression changed. "You haven't received annual statements?" "In 8 years?" My mother stood up. "This is ridiculous. I don't need to justify myself. Everything I've done has been for Jamie's own good." Kendall asked her directly, "Did you spend Jamie's inheritance on my wedding?" My mother's face did this thing where she tried to look offended but couldn't quite manage it. "How dare you accuse me of that? I was helping you out of love." "With Jamie's money," Kendall said flatly. "Show us the investment account then," Robert said. "Just pull it up on your phone. Prove the money's still there." My mother grabbed her purse and screamed, "I don't need to prove anything to any of you. You're all ungrateful." Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. She stormed out the front door and slammed it so hard the windows shook. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I could hear my own breathing and the tick of the clock on the wall and nothing else. Kendall was staring at me with this look on her face like she was seeing me for the first time. Her mouth was open slightly and her eyes were getting wider. Robert had his phone out already and was typing something fast with his thumbs. The rest of the family just sat there frozen with forks halfway to mouths or wine glasses suspended in midair. My Aunt Nina reached over and put her hand on my arm. Her fingers felt cold. Kendall pushed her chair back and stood up. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor and the sound made everyone jump. Her voice came out shaky, but she kept it steady. She looked right at me and asked where that $30,000 really came from. She needed to know right now. Her parents moved closer to her on both sides like they were forming a wall of support. Her mom put an arm around her waist. Her dad touched her shoulder. Robert looked up from his phone and started talking in this calm accountant voice. He told everyone to stay calm and said if there was a real investment account somewhere, there would be records. Bank statements and transaction histories and tax documents. He turned to me and asked when I last saw any paperwork about the inheritance. I felt my face get hot. I told him I never saw anything. Not in 8 years. Not once. The words came out quiet, and I realized how stupid that sounded. How could I go 8 years without seeing a single statement or document? Robert's whole face changed. His eyebrows went up and his mouth got tight. He asked me to repeat that, and I did. Nina squeezed my arm harder and asked me directly how much my grandmother left me. I looked at her and said $80,000. The whole table exploded. People started talking over each other. Someone said that's a lot of money. Someone else said, how does that just disappear? My uncle was shaking his head. Kendall's grandmother started crying. Robert held up his hand for quiet and everyone stopped talking. Gregory stood up and said they needed to call my mother back right now. She needed to come back and show everyone proof that the money was still there. Show the investment account on her phone. Show something. Robert nodded and pulled up her number. He put the phone on speaker and we all listened to it ring. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. He tried again. Same thing. He tried a 3rd time and this time it went straight to voicemail like she'd turned her phone off. Kendall made this sound like a sob and a gasp mixed together. She sat back down hard in her chair and put her face in her hands. She said she felt sick. She said her wedding might have been paid for with my stolen money. I reached across the table and tried to tell her this wasn't her fault. She didn't know. None of us knew. But she was crying now and saying she never would have accepted that money if she'd known. She would have found another way. She would have had a smaller wedding. She would have done anything except take my inheritance. Her mom was crying too now, and her dad looked like he wanted to hit something. Robert put his phone down and looked around the table. He said we should all go home for tonight, but we needed to meet tomorrow at his office. We needed to start writing everything down. Every conversation I could remember about the inheritance. Every excuse my mother gave. Every time I asked about statements. He said we needed to treat this like a fraud case because that's probably what it was. We needed to gather all the information we could. Kendall looked up at me with red eyes and mascara running down her face. She asked if I was going to sue my mother. I didn't know what to say. I just sat there looking at my plate. Robert said first things first. We needed to document everything and then figure out what options I had. Legal options. He knew people who handled this kind of thing. Family theft cases, inheritance disputes, people who could help. Nina asked if I had anywhere to stay tonight. She said I could stay with them if I didn't want to be alone. I told her I'd be okay. I needed to go home and think. Process everything. But really, I just needed to get out of that room where everyone was looking at me with pity and shock. I drove home with both hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My hands were shaking. My whole body was shaking, actually. I kept replaying the dinner in my head. My mother's face when Robert mentioned the inheritance. How fast she talked trying to explain. How she grabbed her purse and ran instead of showing proof. 8 years of her telling me I wasn't ready. 8 years of moved goalposts. Get to 40,000, get to 50, become a manager, buy property, get married, save 6 months' expenses, max out retirement. Every single requirement was just another delay, another excuse, another way to keep the money. And I believed her. I actually believed she was trying to teach me something. That she was protecting me from myself. That she loved me enough to be the tough parent who made me earn my success. But there was no lesson. There was no protection. There was just theft. Slow theft over 8 years while she bought a new car and renovated her kitchen and took cruises and lived well on my grandmother's money. On my money. The money my grandmother wanted me to have. I got home and went straight to my laptop. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even sit still. I opened my email and started searching for anything from my mother about the inheritance. There were dozens of messages. Hundreds, maybe. I started reading through them. Every time I'd asked about the money. Every time I'd hit one of her goalposts and asked if I could have access now. Her responses were all the same pattern. Praise for my progress. Then a new requirement. Then some speech about responsibility and earning success and not being like other young people who waste money. I found one from 3 years ago where I'd asked to see the investment statements. She wrote back that she'd send them soon, but she was traveling and would get them to me when she returned. She never sent them. I'd forgotten to follow up. I found another from last year where I told her I'd maxed my retirement for 5 years like she said. She responded that she was so proud, but I should focus on building my emergency fund more before taking on the responsibility of managing a large sum. There was always something, always one more thing. I pulled up our text messages next. The pattern was even clearer there. Short messages from me asking about the money. Long responses from her about patience and responsibility and trust. Telling me she was investing wisely. Telling me I'd thank her someday. Telling me most parents would have just spent it, but she was being careful, being smart, protecting my future. Every single message was manipulation. Every single one was a lie to cover up what she was doing. My phone rang at 8 the next morning. I'd been awake all night sitting on my couch surrounded by printed emails and screenshots. Robert's name showed on the screen. I answered, and he said he'd spent the evening making calls. He had a lawyer friend who handled family theft cases, financial abuse situations, elder abuse usually, but she'd worked on cases like mine before. She was willing to meet with me and talk about my options. Her name was Aurelia. He gave me her number and said I should call today. He also said he and Kendall and her parents wanted to meet at his office that afternoon if I was up for it. Start building a timeline. Start documenting everything. I said yes. I said I'd be there. I asked if he really thought my mother stole everything. He was quiet for a second. Then he said yes. He said there was no other explanation. If she had investment accounts, she would have shown them last night. She would have pulled up her phone right there at the table and proved everyone wrong. Instead, she ran. People who are innocent don't run. They don't scream and deflect. They show proof. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called Aurelia's number. A woman answered on the second ring. I told her Robert gave me her name. She said she'd been expecting my call. She asked if I could come to her office that afternoon before I met with Robert. She wanted to hear my story and talk about what options I might have. Legal options, ways to get my money back. I said yes. I said I'd be there at 2. She gave me the address and said to bring any documentation I had. Any emails or texts or notes about the inheritance. Anything that showed what my mother promised and what she actually did. I looked at the papers spread across my couch and coffee table. I had plenty of documentation. I had 8 years of lies in writing. Robert's office felt cold when I walked in the next afternoon. He'd already covered one wall with a huge whiteboard divided into columns. Years across the top. My achievements down the left side. My mother's excuses in red marker filling the middle. Kendall sat at the conference table with her parents, Nina and Gregory. They all looked up when I entered. Robert handed me a legal pad and told me to start writing. Every conversation I could remember about the inheritance. Every excuse my mother gave. Every time I asked to see statements. I sat down and started filling pages. First year, she said I needed to make $40,000. Second year, $50,000. Third year, manager position. The pattern looked worse written out like this. Each requirement perfectly timed to keep me waiting. Each excuse designed to sound reasonable. Kendall pushed a folder across the table to me. Wedding planning documents, vendor contracts, payment records. On top sat a copy of the check. $30,000 from my mother's personal account, dated 4 months ago. Kendall's hands shook as she explained she'd brought everything that showed money from my mother. She said she needed to help prove what happened, even though it meant facing that her wedding was funded by theft. Her voice cracked on the last word. Robert took the folder and added the check copy to his evidence wall. He explained that without any investment account papers, the burden of proof was on my mother to show where the money went. The fact that she ran away screaming instead of pulling up statements on her phone was extremely telling. In his professional opinion as an accountant, legitimate investments always have paper trails, always have statements, always have tax documents. The complete absence of documentation after 8 years meant one of two things. Either the accounts never existed, or my mother was hiding them. Both options pointed to theft. Nina spoke up from her seat. She admitted she always thought it was odd that my mother controlled my inheritance for so long. She'd assumed it was some kind of trust arrangement, some legal structure that required parental oversight. She felt guilty for not questioning it more directly over the years, for praising my mother's wisdom instead of asking to see the actual investment accounts. Gregory nodded and said they should have pushed harder when I hit every milestone and still couldn't access the money. The whole family had enabled this by accepting my mother's explanations without proof. I left Robert's office with copies of everything and drove straight to Aurelia Redmond's law office downtown. She'd agreed to meet me that afternoon. Her assistant brought me to a conference room where Aurelia was already waiting. She asked me to tell her everything from the beginning. I walked through the whole story. The inheritance, the 8 years of excuses, the wedding money, the dinner confrontation, my mother's refusal to show any documentation. Aurelia listened without interrupting and took notes on her laptop. When I finished, she said this was unfortunately more common than people think, especially with inheritance money and family members. She explained my legal options ranged from demanding full accounting to filing civil suit for theft and fraud. We could start with a formal demand or go straight to court. The choice depended on whether I thought my mother would cooperate or fight. I told her my mother would fight. Aurelia nodded like she expected that answer. She recommended starting with a formal legal demand letter requiring my mother to provide complete papers about the inheritance money within 30 days. This gave her a chance to cooperate before we took things to court. If she provided legitimate investment statements showing the money was safe and growing, we could potentially resolve this without litigation. But if she couldn't or wouldn't provide records, that became powerful evidence for a lawsuit. The demand letter would also establish a clear timeline, 30 days to comply. After that, we'd have legal grounds to escalate. I authorized Aurelia to send the demand letter. She pulled up a template on her computer and started filling in details. $80,000, 8 years, no documentation provided, 30 days to produce complete investment records. She explained the next step would be hiring a forensic accountant if my mother couldn't or wouldn't provide legitimate records. The investigation could take months, but would trace where the money actually went. Bank records, credit card statements, major purchases. The forensic accountant would build a complete picture of how my mother spent the inheritance. I signed the authorization form, and Aurelia said she'd have the demand letter sent by registered mail tomorrow. My mother would have to sign for it. No way to claim she never received it. I drove home feeling exhausted, but also strangely calm. I'd taken action, started the legal process, put my mother on notice that I wasn't backing down. My phone rang that evening while I was heating up dinner. My mother's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer. But I needed to hear what she'd say now that lawyers were involved. Her voice came through cold and angry instead of defensive. She said I'd humiliated her in front of the entire family and destroyed her reputation by accusing her of theft. Everyone was calling her, asking questions, treating her like a criminal. How could I do this to my own mother? I kept my voice steady and told her she could end this immediately by providing the investment account statements she'd claimed to have for 8 years. Just show me the money was still there and growing like she always said. Show me the investment returns. Show me anything that proved she'd been managing my inheritance properly. She went quiet for a second. Then she said she didn't have to prove anything to me. She was my mother. I owed her everything. This whole situation was me being ungrateful and cruel after everything she'd done for me. I said managing someone's inheritance wasn't doing them a favor. It was a responsibility. One that required documentation and transparency. 30 days to provide the records or my lawyer would take further action. She hung up without responding. 2 days later, she called again. I answered because I figured she'd keep trying until I did. Her voice sounded different this time, less angry and more careful. She asked if we could talk about this reasonably, without lawyers getting involved. I told her the lawyer already sent the demand letter and it should arrive any day now. The line went completely quiet. Not just regular silence, but the kind where I could tell she was processing something bad. Then she said so I was really going to sue my own mother, and the call ended before I could say anything back. She just hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling weird about the whole thing. Part of me wanted to feel guilty, but mostly I just felt tired. Robert called me the next morning while I was getting ready for work. He sounded frustrated. My mother had contacted him late the night before, asking if this whole legal thing was really necessary. She told him there must be some kind of confusion or mistake about the money. Robert said he told her the only confusion was about where $80,000 went, and she needed to show him the papers proving she still had it. She apparently got mad and said he was taking my side against family. He said there weren't sides, just facts and documentation. She hung up on him too. The 30 days in the demand letter passed without any response from my mother. No call, no email, no documents, nothing. Aurelia called me to discuss next steps and said this silence actually helped our case. It showed my mother either couldn't or wouldn't account for the money. If she had legitimate investment records, she would have sent them immediately to make this go away. The fact that she chose silence instead spoke volumes about what really happened to my inheritance. We scheduled a meeting to discuss hiring a forensic accountant who could trace where the money actually went. I met with Wyatt Duran at Aurelia's office 3 days later. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, and he had this calm way of explaining complicated financial stuff. I signed a bunch of forms giving him permission to request my mother's bank records and financial documents through legal discovery. He explained the process would take several weeks because banks don't move fast, but the investigation should reveal exactly how my mother spent the inheritance. He'd track every deposit, every withdrawal, every major purchase over the past 8 years. The goal was building a complete picture of where my grandmother's money ended up. I left his office feeling like things were finally moving forward in a concrete way. My phone rang that evening while I was making dinner. Kendall's name showed up on the screen. She sounded upset when I answered. Her parents insisted on paying me back the $30,000 from the wedding. even though I kept telling them it wasn't their fault, and they didn't owe me anything. Nina got on the phone and said they couldn't enjoy their daughter's wedding, knowing it got funded by stolen money. The check was already written. They were bringing it over tomorrow whether I liked it or not. I tried arguing, but Nina said the conversation was over. They were doing this and I needed to accept it. The next day, Kendall and her parents showed up at my condo with the check. Nina hugged me and apologized for not seeing what my mother was doing all those years. Gregory said they should have asked more questions about the inheritance situation instead of just accepting my mother's explanations. I took the check because I needed the money, but it felt complicated. This was only a fraction of what got taken from me. Still, holding that check felt important somehow. It was the first real step toward getting back what I lost. The first piece of my inheritance returning to me after 8 years. It made everything feel more real and less like some nightmare I couldn't wake up from. A week later, my mother sent a long email. I almost deleted it without reading, but I needed to see what she'd say. The email claimed she did invest my money like she always said, but she made some bad choices and lost most of it. She was too embarrassed to tell me the truth. She'd been trying to make the money back before I found out, hoping to fix everything quietly. The email went on for paragraphs about how guilty she felt and how she never meant for any of this to happen. She said she loved me and just wanted to protect me from knowing about her mistakes. I forwarded the email to Aurelia without responding to my mother. Aurelia called me within an hour and said this excuse was totally expected. Lots of people caught stealing money claim they lost it in bad investments. It's a common story because it sounds better than admitting they spent it on themselves. She said we'd need to see actual proof of these supposed investments and losses. Bank statements showing money going into investment accounts. Records of what stocks or funds she bought. Documentation of when and how the losses occurred. Without proof, this email was just another story. She forwarded everything to Wyatt to include in his financial investigation. The stress of everything started getting to me in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. I wasn't sleeping well. I kept replaying conversations with my mother from over the years, seeing the manipulation I'd missed before. Robert suggested I talk to someone professional about processing all this. He gave me the name of a therapist who worked with people dealing with family financial abuse. I called Annika Schulze and got an appointment for the following week. Her office was small and comfortable, not sterile like I expected. She asked me to start from the beginning, so I told her about my grandmother's death and my mother taking control of the money, about the 8 years of moving requirements and excuses, about the dinner where everything fell apart. Annika listened without interrupting, taking notes occasionally. When I finished, she said what happened to me was financial abuse combined with systematic gaslighting. My mother had spent years manipulating my perception of reality to cover up theft. The therapy session lasted an hour, and I left feeling exhausted but also validated. Annika helped me see that my mother's actions weren't protective like she always claimed. The constantly changing goalposts weren't about teaching me anything. They were designed to keep me compliant and doubting myself while she spent my inheritance. Every time I met a requirement, she created a new one because she needed more time to spend more money. The manipulation was deliberate and planned, not some misguided attempt to help me grow. Understanding that changed something fundamental in how I saw the whole situation. 2 days after that therapy session, Wyatt called me. His voice sounded different from before, more serious and careful with his words. He said he finished going through all the financial records and found some patterns we needed to discuss right away. He wanted to meet with me and Aurelia together because the findings were pretty concerning. We set up the meeting for the next afternoon at Aurelia's office. I barely slept that night knowing I was about to see exactly where my $80,000 went. The next day, I arrived at Aurelia's office 10 minutes early and sat in the waiting room trying to keep my hands from shaking. Wyatt showed up carrying a thick folder and a laptop, and Aurelia led us both into her conference room. Wyatt opened his laptop and pulled out printed spreadsheets from the folder, spreading them across the table. He started explaining what he found, and his words made my stomach drop. My mother deposited the entire $80,000 into her personal checking account 8 years ago, right after my grandmother died. There were no investment accounts. There never had been any investment accounts. The money just sat in her regular checking account, and she spent it gradually over the years on whatever she wanted. Wyatt pulled up bank statements on his laptop showing the deposits and withdrawals, month by month, year by year. He walked me through the major expenses using a spreadsheet he created. The new car she bought 3 years ago cost $28,000, paid in full with a single check. The kitchen renovation she did 5 years ago was $35,000, paid to the contractor in 3 installments over 4 months. The yearly cruises she took added up to about $12,000 total over the 8 years. The remaining $15,000 got spent on general living expenses, eating out, shopping, clothes, and eventually the $30,000 check to Kendall, which actually overdrew the account since only $15,000 was left by then. She had to transfer money from her own savings to cover that check, which is probably why she panicked, so badly when Robert asked about keeping the funds separate. Aurelia leaned forward and said this documentation proved theft and fraud beyond any doubt. We had grounds for an extremely strong civil case against my mother. She recommended filing the lawsuit immediately, and she also suggested I think about reporting this to the police for potential criminal charges, since this was clearly intentional theft over many years, not some mistake or misunderstanding. I felt sick looking at the spreadsheet Wyatt created. Every line item showed how my inheritance funded my mother's lifestyle, while she told me I wasn't successful enough to have my own money. Every vacation she took, every upgrade she made to her house, every luxury purchase was bought with money my grandmother meant for my future. The car I saw her driving around was purchased with my inheritance. The beautiful kitchen she showed off at family gatherings was built with my inheritance. The cruise photos she posted on social media were taken on trips funded by my inheritance. And the whole time she was spending it, she was lecturing me about hard work and earning success properly. Robert came to the meeting too, sitting next to me for support. He looked at the spreadsheets and said the evidence was totally clear and overwhelming. He told Aurelia he would testify about the dinner confrontation and how my mother couldn't provide any investment papers when he asked. He said as an accountant, he could explain to a court why her story made no sense and why any legitimate investment would have documentation. I told Aurelia to go ahead and file the civil lawsuit. I wanted my money back and I wanted it in writing that she stole from me. But I wasn't sure yet about criminal charges. The idea of my mother potentially going to jail made me feel complicated things I couldn't quite sort out. Aurelia said that was fine. We could start with the civil case and I could decide about criminal charges later. She would start preparing the lawsuit papers immediately. A week later, my mother got served with the lawsuit at her house. She called me within an hour, screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She said I was destroying our family and tearing apart everything we had. She kept yelling that she was my mother, and I owed her everything, and this betrayal was worse than anything she ever did to me. I didn't argue with her or try to explain myself. I just said calmly that she stole $80,000 from me and I wanted it back. She started to say something else, but I hung up. Then I blocked her number on my phone like Annika advised me to do for my mental health. Over the next few days, several family members reached out to me. Some of them were the same relatives who used to praise my mother's wisdom about teaching me responsibility. They apologized for not questioning the situation more carefully over the years. They said they should have realized something was wrong when she never showed any investment statements or let me have access to my own money. My Aunt Nina called and said she felt terrible for not speaking up sooner, and she was proud of me for standing up for myself now. A few relatives called me in the days after that, and they weren't supportive like Nina. My mother's sister told me I was being vindictive, and that family matters should stay private. She said I was destroying our family over money, and that I should be ashamed. Another cousin sent me a long text about how I was tearing the family apart, and that my mother made mistakes but didn't deserve this public humiliation. I felt angry reading these messages because they were acting like I was the problem instead of the person who stole $80,000 from me. Nina found out about these calls and sent an email to the whole family. She wrote that people criticizing me didn't understand the full situation and should review Wyatt's forensic report before making judgments. She attached the report to the email showing exactly how my mother spent my inheritance on herself while lying to me for 8 years. After that email went out, most of the critical relatives went quiet. 2 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, Aurelia called me at work. She said my mother hired a lawyer who contacted her about settling the case before trial. The lawyer sent over a settlement proposal that morning. I asked what they were offering, and Aurelia said $40,000 paid in installments over 5 years. I felt my face get hot hearing that number. $40,000 was only half of what was stolen, and spreading it over 5 years meant I might never see all of it if my mother decided to stop paying. Aurelia said the offer was insulting given the strength of our evidence, and that my mother's lawyer knew they would lose at trial. She recommended I reject it completely. I told Aurelia I wanted to reject the settlement and that I wanted full restitution plus interest and legal fees. My mother had 8 years to make this right, and instead she spent every single dollar while gaslighting me about success and responsibility. I wasn't going to accept half the money stretched over 5 years like some kind of favor. Aurelia said she would respond to my mother's lawyer, making it clear we were prepared to go to trial and win. That afternoon, I had my regular therapy appointment with Annika. I told her about the settlement offer and how angry it made me. Annika asked me to talk about what I was really angry about beyond just the money itself. I started listing things and realized there were so many. The money would have let me buy a better home in a neighborhood I actually wanted to live in, instead of the small condo I could barely afford. I could have started the business I always thought about, but never had the capital for. I could have invested in my future instead of struggling paycheck to paycheck trying to meet arbitrary goalposts that kept moving. I could have traveled or gone back to the school or had financial security. Instead, I spent 8 years working myself to death trying to prove I was successful enough while my mother lived off money that was supposed to be mine. Annika helped me see that the anger wasn't just about what was taken, but about all the opportunities I lost and the years I wasted trying to earn something that was already mine. The legal process moved forward over the next few weeks. Kendall had to give a deposition about the wedding money and what she knew about my grandmother's intentions for the inheritance. She called me the night before looking nervous and said she felt terrible about having to testify against her aunt. I told her I understood, but that I needed her to be honest about what happened. The deposition happened at Aurelia's office, and Kendall was there for about 2 hours. Aurelia told me afterward that Kendall did well and was clearly uncomfortable, but remained truthful about everything she witnessed. She confirmed my mother contributed $30,000 to the wedding, and that my mother told everyone it came from successful investments. Kendall also testified about conversations with my grandmother before she died, where my grandmother specifically said the $80,000 was meant to help me build a good life. Robert's deposition was scheduled a week after Kendall's. He went in prepared with notes about the dinner confrontation and his professional opinion as an accountant. Aurelia said his testimony was really damaging to my mother's defense because he explained in detail why the lack of any investment documentation over 8 years made my mother's story impossible to believe. He walked through what legitimate investment management would look like and how there would be quarterly statements, tax documents, and clear paper trails. The absence of anything like that proved my mother never invested the money at all. A month after Robert's deposition, my mother's lawyer contacted Aurelia again requesting mediation. The lawyer acknowledged that the evidence was problematic for their case and suggested we try to reach an agreement through mediation instead of going to trial. Aurelia said this was a good sign because it meant they knew they would lose badly if we went in front of a judge. She said we should agree to mediation because we could negotiate a much better settlement now that they understood how strong our case was. The mediation was scheduled for 2 weeks later at a neutral office downtown. I was nervous driving there that morning because I would have to be in the same room as my mother for the first time since she got served with the lawsuit. Annika had prepared me for this in our sessions and reminded me to stay focused on the facts and not get pulled into emotional arguments. The mediation room was small with a long table and the mediator sitting at the head. My mother and her lawyer were already there when Aurelia and I walked in. My mother wouldn't look at me at all and kept her eyes down on the table. She looked smaller than I remembered, almost shrunken in her chair. Her lawyer did most of the talking while she sat there silently. The mediation went on for hours with breaks where the mediator would talk to each side separately. My mother's lawyer kept trying to argue that she had made mistakes but didn't intend to steal from me. Aurelia shut that down by pointing to Wyatt's forensic report showing systematic spending over 8 years. Every time they tried to lower the settlement amount, Aurelia would remind them what a judge would likely award, plus legal fees and interest. By late afternoon, my mother's lawyer came back with a new offer. $75,000 including interest and my legal fees. My mother would have to sell her car and take a home equity loan against her house to come up with the money. The payment would be made within 60 days. Aurelia said this was probably the best we could get without going through a full trial, which could take another year. I looked across the table at my mother, who was still staring down, refusing to meet my eyes. I accepted the settlement even though it didn't fully cover what was taken from me. Aurelia explained that getting more would require a lengthy trial with no guarantee of a better outcome, and my mother might not even have more assets to take. This way, I would get most of my money back quickly and could move forward with my life. Aurelia sent me the final settlement agreement 3 days later, and I read through every page carefully. The document included a section where my mother had to acknowledge in writing that she received my $80,000 inheritance in trust and misappropriated those funds for personal expenses, including a vehicle purchase, home renovation, vacation travel, and contributions to family events. Seeing it spelled out in legal language made it feel more real somehow. This wasn't just my word against hers anymore. She had to sign her name admitting what she did. The agreement also included a no-contact provision that prohibited my mother from contacting me directly through any means for a minimum of 2 years. If she violated this restriction by calling, texting, emailing, or showing up at my home or workplace, she would owe an additional penalty of $10,000 per violation. Aurelia said this was important because it gave me legal protection from further manipulation attempts while I worked on healing. I signed the agreement and sent it back. My mother's lawyer confirmed she signed it too, though Aurelia said she apparently cried through the whole process. I felt nothing when I heard that. Maybe I should have felt something, but I just didn't. The settlement money arrived in my bank account exactly 58 days after mediation. I logged into my banking app and stared at the number for a long time. $75,000. I got most of my inheritance back after 8 years. I should have felt purely happy or relieved, but instead I felt this weird mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. Relief was definitely there because I finally had the money my grandmother wanted me to have. But there was also this deep sadness that wouldn't go away. I couldn't get back those 8 years of being told I wasn't good enough. I couldn't undo all the times she made me doubt myself or question my own success. The money was back, but the relationship with my mother was gone forever. That person I thought she was, the mother who wanted to protect and guide me, never actually existed. She was always just someone who saw an opportunity to take what wasn't hers. I talked about this in my next session with Annika. She listened while I tried to explain how strange it felt to have won, but still feel like I lost something important. Annika said what I was experiencing was grief, and that mourning the mother I thought I had was actually a necessary part of healing. She explained that I wasn't mourning the woman who stole from me. I was mourning the idea of a mother who loved me enough to put my needs first. That version of my mother never existed, and accepting that truth was painful, but also freeing in a way. I didn't have to keep trying to earn her approval or meet her standards anymore. Those goalposts she kept moving weren't about helping me grow, they were about keeping control of money that was never hers. Understanding that helped me stop blaming myself for not being successful enough sooner. 2 weeks after the money arrived, I started seriously looking at condos in neighborhoods I actually wanted to live in. My current place was fine, but I had only bought it because it was what I could afford with my mortgage approval at the time. Now I had enough for a real down payment on something better. I found a 2-bedroom condo in a neighborhood I loved, with good restaurants nearby and a park where I could walk in the mornings. The building was newer with actual amenities like a gym and a rooftop deck. I made an offer and put down $40,000 from the settlement money. Choosing this investment for myself, without needing anyone's permission or approval, felt incredibly powerful. Nobody was telling me I had to wait until I was married or had more savings or proved myself in some other arbitrary way. This was my money and my choice. When the offer was accepted, I actually cried a little bit. Not sad crying, just this overwhelming feeling of finally getting to make my own decisions about my own life. Kendall called me the day after I told her about the condo. She said she wanted to take me out to celebrate, and also to talk about something that had been on her mind. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our places. Kendall looked nervous when she sat down, fidgeting with her cup. She told me she was grateful I exposed the truth about the wedding money, even though it had been painful for everyone. She said if she hadn't known where that $30,000 came from, she would have always felt weird about her wedding. Every time she looked at her photos or remembered that day, she would have been celebrating something funded by theft. At least now she knew the truth and her parents had made it right by reimbursing me. I told her she had nothing to feel guilty about because she didn't know what my mother was doing. Kendall said she knew that logically, but she still felt better knowing everything was out in the open now. We ended up talking for 2 hours about family and trust, and how weird it was that we were closer now than we had been before all this happened. Robert called me a few days later and said he wanted to help me set up proper investment accounts now that I had the settlement money. He recommended a financial advisor he had worked with for years, someone who provided quarterly statements and complete transparency about every transaction. I met with the advisor the following week and opened several accounts, including a retirement fund and a regular investment account. The advisor explained everything in detail and showed me exactly how I would receive documentation 4 times a year, plus annual tax forms. She walked me through the investment strategy and made sure I understood where my money was going. Learning to manage money properly felt good, especially since my mother never actually taught me any of this. She had always claimed to be protecting me and preparing me for financial responsibility, but really she was just stealing from me while pretending to be wise. Now I was actually learning what legitimate financial management looked like. Nina asked to meet me for lunch about a month after the settlement. We sat in a quiet restaurant booth and she got right to the point. She told me she had limited her contact with my mother significantly because she couldn't forgive what was done to me. Nina said she still talked to her sister occasionally because they were family, but the relationship had changed completely. She said some betrayals were too fundamental to overlook, even between sisters. What my mother did wasn't just a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was 8 years of calculated theft and manipulation of her own child. Nina said she couldn't respect that or pretend everything was fine. She wanted me to know she was on my side and always would be, and that she was sorry she hadn't questioned things more carefully when my mother was controlling the inheritance. I thanked her for saying that and told her I didn't blame her for not seeing it sooner, because my mother was very good at making her lies sound reasonable. 6 months after the settlement, I was doing surprisingly well both financially and emotionally. I had moved into my new condo and made it feel like home. My investment accounts were growing steadily, and I received quarterly statements showing exactly where my money was and how it was performing. Work was going well, and I had gotten another promotion. I still had complicated feelings about my mother, and probably always would. Sometimes I felt angry about the wasted years. Sometimes I felt sad about losing the relationship I thought we had. Sometimes I felt nothing at all. But I had accepted that our relationship might never recover, and that was her consequence to bear, not mine. She made her choices, and now she had to live with them. I made my choices too, and I chose to move forward without her. Annika and I spent several sessions working on rebuilding my ability to trust other people. The 8 years of gaslighting had damaged something fundamental in how I related to others. I had learned to doubt my own perceptions and second-guess my instincts because my mother had trained me to do that. Annika helped me recognize manipulation patterns so I could spot them early. We practiced setting firm boundaries with people who tried to control me or make me question myself. She taught me that healthy relationships involved mutual respect and transparency, not moving goalposts and hidden agendas. It was slow work and sometimes frustrating, but I was getting better at trusting myself again. I was learning to listen to that voice inside that said something was wrong instead of dismissing it like I had done for so many years with my mother. That voice had been right all along. A few months later, I showed up to a family barbecue at Nina and Gregory's house. My mother wasn't there, which everyone knew would be the case. Several relatives came up to me throughout the afternoon. My uncle from my dad's side pulled me aside near the grill and told me he was proud of how I handled everything. He said he should have questioned the situation years ago when my mother kept talking about teaching me responsibility. My cousin's husband apologized for not speaking up when he thought something seemed off about the inheritance arrangement. He said he assumed it was some kind of legal trust setup and didn't want to pry into family finances. 3 different aunts and uncles separately mentioned they felt terrible for praising my mother's supposed wisdom all those years. I told each of them I didn't blame them because my mother was convincing, and I had believed her lies too for a long time. The gathering felt lighter without the tension of my mother's presence and her constant need to control conversations. Kendall's 1-year anniversary party happened in early fall. She and her husband rented a small event space and invited close family and friends. I brought a nice gift and actually felt happy watching them dance and celebrate. There was no bitter taste in my mouth about stolen money funding their wedding anymore. Kendall's parents had paid me back that $30,000, and my mother had settled the rest. I could look at their wedding photos on display without feeling angry or cheated. Kendall hugged me tight when I arrived and whispered that she was glad I came and that things had worked out. Her happiness felt clean now, not tainted by theft and lies. I stayed late and danced with relatives and ate too much cake. The party reminded me that good things could exist without corruption behind them. I started volunteering with a financial literacy program for young adults in November. The program taught basic money management skills to people aged 18 to 25. I specifically asked to help with the section about protecting inheritances and recognizing financial manipulation. The program coordinator was excited to have someone with real experience in that area. I met with small groups every other week and taught them about demanding documentation, understanding their legal rights, and spotting manipulation tactics. I shared parts of my story without naming my mother, just explaining how someone spent my inheritance while claiming to protect it. The young adults asked good questions about red flags and how to stand up to family members who tried to control their money. Several people thanked me after sessions and said they were going to have hard conversations with relatives who were managing money for them. Turning my awful experience into something helpful felt good. It gave meaning to those 8 years of theft and gaslighting. 1 year after that explosive family dinner, I sat in my condo looking at my financial statements and feeling genuinely happy. I had most of my inheritance back, and it was growing in legitimate investment accounts with real documentation. My home was mine, paid for with my own work and my recovered money. I had clear boundaries with my mother and peace about maintaining them. She had tried contacting me twice through other relatives, but I held firm on the no-contact agreement. The family members who mattered, the ones who stood by me when the truth came out, were the ones I stayed close to. Kendall, Robert, Nina, Gregory, and several cousins became my real family. They were the people who chose honesty over comfortable lies. I had my money, my home, my self-respect, and clarity about who deserved space in my life.